Magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Kamusta kayo ngayong pandemic? Sana okay kayong lahat dyan sa inyong mga tahanan. So today, I've decided to make this video in order for me to discuss thoroughly some of the parts of our topic for this week. Definitions and Approaches to Globalization by Manfred Steger. And this PowerPoint was created by our colleague Janice Morales. So please allow me to use Tagalog as well, as I would like to provide examples and to further emphasize my points in terms of the parts of that lesson. So, kung nabasa niyo yung reading, nakalagay doon na globalization has been attached to many definitions such as its connection with the global dominance of Anglo-American ideas, meaning some people would point out that globalization is connected with the dominance of American culture and the American economy and the American political power. For some, globalization is the increasing global interconnectedness among nation states through the unimpeded flow of capital, people, and ideas beyond borders. So Kenichi Ohmae would say that globalization leads to a borderless world. So capital, people, and ideas can move past borders of nation states, thus the transferring and sharing of culture and economy. So in relation to the imprecise, incorrect, and exaggerated accounts of globalization, some scholars claim that globalization is a globalony. In this part, there are a group of scholars who believe that the term is imprecise, thus the creation of three camps: the rejectionists, the skeptics, and the modifiers. The problem began as almost all transnational processes are cited as evidence of globalization. So ang problema kasi, kaya tinawag na globalization as globalony dahil halos lahat ng nagiging pangyayari or proseso na nagaganap ngayon between countries such as trading, sharing of culture, no, ay ina-attribute sa konsepto ng globalization. So kaya may tatlong kampo na nagre-reject, merong skeptical, at meron namang nagmo-modify ng konsepto ng globalization. So punta tayo dun sa unang kampo. Ito yung mga rejectionists. So ito ay mga tao, ito ay mga scholars. These are scholars who believe that the use of the term globalization is not useful. Why? Ang dahilan ay naniniwala sila na ang paggamit ng terminong globalization denotes nothing. Bakit? Kasi since it denotes everything. Okay, so kung medyo magulo ganito yan. Ang problema kasi sa globalization, gaya ng sinabi ni Craig Calhoun, it is as vague and as complex as nationalism or even love, no? Kung familiar kayo sa salitang love, 'di ba ang love ay subjective. It has a lot of meanings. Love is God, love is sacrifice, love is service, love is patient, etc. So ang konsepto ng love ay basically nakapaloob sa napakaraming definisyon. Parang gano'n si globalization. Si globalization ay nag-e-encompass ng napakaraming aspeto: economic, cultural, social, political concepts or aspects. So dahil ganun kalaki yung sakop niya, itong mga rejectionists naniniwala na ano pang point that we use the term globalization if we cannot distinguish it from others. Like for example, you won't know that globalization is what you are already witnessing or what is already happening. Unlike, like for example, climate change. Di ba ang climate change is very attributable to the concept or to the aspect of the environment. Though merong economic aspect din ang climate change, meron din political aspect of climate change dahil sa mga policies na dapat sana ay ginagawa to promote. Pero it boils down to one concept, which is that it is related to the environment. Globalization is not like that. So, although some would say that na globalization is closer to economics or the free trade and the liberalization of markets, pero meron kasing iba pang mga aspetong ikinakabit sa kanya. Kaya itong mga rejectionists, sinasabi, ayan, katulad ni Susan Strange, globalization is a vacuous term. Anything from the internet to a hamburger is considered to be part or connected to the concept of globalization. For Linda Mize naman, a big idea resting on slim foundations. Globalization is a very big idea na napakaliit nung tinutungtungan niya. Ibig sabihin ng tinutungtungan, hindi pa siya napuprove or hindi pa nagkakaroon ng maiging pag-aaral regarding its reality. Pero ang dami ng ikinakabit sa kanya sa konsepto ng globalization. Kaya kung mapapansin nyo, katulad ng mapapansin sa susunod na slide, in order to remedy the vagueness of the definition of globalization, the rejectionist would say that, or Holton would say that we should abandon the meta theory that is globalization and move it to a middle range theory. So ano ibig sabihin nun? Ang ibig sabihin nun, imbis na ikabit ang lahat ng aspeto, economic, political, social, cultural, sa konsepto ng globalization, make globalization smaller as a theory. Ibig sabihin, ang sakop niya gawing iisa, parang climate change. Gawing mas specific yung aspetong gusto niyang patunguhan. So siguro, if Holton would suggest na globalization could be easily attributed to the economic aspect, just like how climate change can be generally attributable to the environment. Si Steger naman combined a social, scientific, and interpretive approach. So kung nabasa nyo na yung reading na isa ni Steger, yung ideologies of globalization, di ba may dinifferentiate niya si globality, sa globalism, sa globalization in order to provide a clearer distinction of what these three things are. No? So you would know when globalization is happening, or when globality is occurring or is present, or when globalism is there. No? So kung rejectionist ka, ano ang paniniwala mo basically? Ang pinapaniwalaan mo ay hindi na dapat gamitin yung konsepto or yung tawag na globalization as it is a very vague term. Okay, kaya nga sila tinawag na rejectionist. Yung pangalawang kampo naman, yung tinatawag ng mga skeptics. So these are scholars who believe in the concept of globalization, but they assert that it is limited in terms of nature. So example nito, si Hearst Thompson believed that the world economy is not global because it is only concentrated in Europe, Eastern Asia, and North America. So ang ibig sabihin ni Hearst Thompson, yes, globalization is possible, but you cannot claim it to be possible because the world economy is not yet global. Okay? So kung naiintindihan nyo yung binanggit ko na yun, parang sinasabi ni Hearst Thompson, oo, merong pwedeng magkaroon ng globalization, pero hindi pa yan nakikita ngayon dahil ang ating world market or ating world economy is very much dominated by these certain regions lamang. Unless all nation states will transcend the national origin and scope, katulad ng nakasulat sa susunod na bullet sa slide, unless countries transcend the national concept, no, in terms of the global of their economic activity. Like for example, if the Philippines would readily transfer goods and services to countries such as the United States, China, and Japan with limited taxation or limited tariffs or lesser restrictions, pwede mong sabihin, or if all countries would do that, pwede mong sabihin that globalization is actually happening or the process is there, no? Pero dahil nga skeptic ka, sa Tagalog kasi ng skeptic, nagdududa ka if it is really happening because the evidence is not yet there, is not yet clear, no? So furthermore, without a truly global economic system, there can be no globalization. Yun nga yung sinasabi ko. Unless the economic system presents to be truly global, we cannot easily just assert that globalization is happening. Okay? So, ma'am, bakit po nakasentro doon sa konsepto ng global economic system si Hearst Thompson? Kasi ang paniniwala nga is, when your economic system is global, no, the transfer of goods and services would readily affect the sharing of culture. So, kung kunwari, nakakapagpasok tayo ng goods sa US at ang US ay nakakapagpasok ng goods sa Pilipinas, syempre yung mga goods na ipinapasok dito, presents a certain change or shift in our culture. No? So yung paggamit ng sapatos ng Nike or ng Adidas, etc. is something that we would not imbibe unless there is a transfer of goods in the first place. Same with, like, for example, Netflix, no? So the transfer of good, Netflix is actually an economic good, syempre, because you pay for it. Pero yung content nanggagaling sa countries such as South Korea and then the US and the UK, and then because you can readily watch these videos or these TV shows, the sharing of culture is there. So, kaya kung tatanungin, bakit ma'am, sa global economic system nakadepend yung konsepto ng globalization? Because everything follows from there. Like, policies also follow from this global economic system because when you have a global economic system, you put down your barriers, your borders in order to sustain the transfer of the goods. Ibig sabihin ng pagbaba ng barriers or borders, ganito yun guys. Kapag magta-transfer ka ng goods sa ibang bansa, instead of getting higher taxes, which would limit the entry of goods from their country to us, you would lower down the tax. So, syempre, habang bumababa yung tax ng pagpasok ng goods sa Pilipinas, mas maraming country ang gustong magpasok ngayon ng good. So, that would in effect would mean that we will be exposed to a lot of different cultures. Same with them and vice versa. So, if countries such as the US and the China would impose lesser restrictions in terms of the transfer of goods of their market, they would allow investors from other countries, like for example, mga Japanese mag-i-invest sa Pilipinas. So nagkakaroon ng mas mabilis na transfer ng goods, and then mas magkakaroon ng konsepto na yes, we are putting down our borders, thus the concept of globalization happening. So yung pangatlong camp naman is your modifiers. Ito yung mga taong naniniwala talaga that globalization is actually there and always has been there. So these scholars believe that it is a historically imprecise concept, the concept of globalization, because as Wallerstein and Frank would claim in the world systems theory, the modern capitalist economy has always been global since its inception. Simula nung nag-adapt ang mga bansa ng kapitalistang mode of economy. When we say capitalist, in a shorter way, I will explain it in a shorter way. The difference of a capitalist economy is that it is always geared towards profit. Ano yung sabihin ng always geared towards profit? Lagi all economic activities are geared towards the concept that you would get something from it or what is called kita. So, kung magtataka kayo, ma'am, paano mo po masasabi ang kapitalistang economic system lang po ba ay nakikita sa palitan ng goods? Kuwari, bumili ka ng milk tea, may kinita yung nagbenta, yun na po ba yun? Hindi. The capitalist economic system does not reside in the economy alone. It also resides in political, social, and cultural aspects. Like for example, kung birthday mo at hindi ka binila ng cake ng nanay mo, would you feel that it is your birthday? Di ba kadalasan people would associate birthdays, celebrations with things that they need to buy. Valentine's Day. Di ba pag Valentine's Day, bibili dapat ng chocolate o ng flowers for your loved ones, etc. This is the capitalist way of thinking. Kasi ang nangyayari ngayon, we capitalize on the day, on the event, that some people can get profit from the event. So, ang konsepto ng kapitalistang sistema ay hindi lamang naikukulong sa konsepto ng pagkakaroon ng kita ng mga nagbebenta, kundi nagkakaroon din ng change in practice. Kasi may mga bansa, contrary to the capitalist system, may mga bansang tinatawag na socialist, like North Korea. North Korea is a socialist economic system. Ano yung sabihin nun? Their economy is not geared towards getting profit. Their economy is geared towards the decisions of the government in the production of goods and services. So ano ibig sabihin nung gobyerno ang nagdidikta ng kung ano ipoproduce? So hindi sila after sa profit. They're after what the government tells them to do. So pwede nyo i-research yun. What is the difference between a capitalist and a socialist economic system? in order for you to better understand what I am saying. Pero balik ako sa modifiers, no? The modifiers believe that globalization has always been there since we already adopted the capitalist economic system. So the globalizing tendencies have been proceeding along the continuum of modernization for a long time. Ang pinagkaiba lang, ang kiniklaim ng mga modifiers, since globalization has always been there, kaya sila tinawag na modifiers, they believe that globalization takes different forms as modernization results to changes. So kung dati, ganito lang yung type ng globalization na makikita mo, no? Ngayon, sa ngayong panahon, lalo na through the emergence of the internet and information communication technologies, the social media such as Facebook. So nag-modify and your Netflix, no, for one, nagbabago ngayon yung shape ni globalization. So si modifier, unlike the skeptics and the rejectionists, naniniwala siyang globalization is there, pero naniniwala siya that it takes different shapes and forms. So si Robert Gilpin confirms the existence of globalizing tendencies but insists that many aspects of globalization are new. So yun nga, gaya ng nasabi ko, the information communication technologies, your Netflix, the emergence of your internet and the reliance on the internet are aspects of globalizations that that are new as time goes by. So we won't know sa mga susunod na panahon, lalo na ngayon nag-pandemic, the aspect of globalization shifts as well. Okay, so yun ang mga kiniklaim ng mga modifiers. So furthermore, according to Wallerstein, global integration is driven largely by economic forces. So New World System scholars would claim that quantitative analysis are the focus of criticisms, and there is a neglect to the qualitative shift in social and political relations. So after ko matapos dito sa video na ito, pwede kayong mag-reflect kung kayo ba ay mas naniniwala na ang globalization ay dapat i-reject, tayo ba ay dapat maging skeptic about it? It is there but it is not happening, it's not yet happening, or kayo ay naniniwalang ito ay modified, meaning it has always been there but it is changing in its forms. So yan, pag nilayan natin, yan mga kaibigan. So in terms of the dimensions of globalization, the first one is the globalization as an economic process. So historical development of markets has led to the intensified form of global interdependence. So the increased linkages of national incomes through trade, financial flows, and foreign direct investments by multinational firms. So actually, karamihan sa mga tao would claim that globalization is actually an economic process, that all this time, the concept of globalization can really be attributable to the concept of the liberalization of markets. Pag-aaralan natin yan next week. So, economic globalization emerged after the post-World War and the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, which is said to be the golden age of controlled capitalism because of the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the IBRD. So, the creation of this international monetary institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank signified that countries or the global economies actually being in transition. Ibig sabihin, kaya kinailangan yung creation ng isang ng mga agencies such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank is because the economies, national economies of countries are connected with one another. Thus, the concept that economic globalization is actually happening. So, in the 1980s, neoliberalism and liberalization, neoliberalism resulted to the liberalization and internationalization of financial transactions. So, ito yung mga structural adjustment policies or SAPs na nagsimula sa Amerika. So yung liberalization, privatization, and deregulation are practices under the capitalist system. Pag sinabi mong liberalization, ang ibig sabihin nun ay you have fewer government restrictions in terms of the market. Privatization, you have government economic institutions that are being privatized. While deregulation, no, yung deregulation naman is pinaliliit mo, no? Binabago mo yung sistema in order to limit or impose fewer restrictions. So the creation of international financial markets such as TNCs, yan, madalas rin natin mababanggit yan. Ano yung mga TNCs? Transnational corporations. These are businesses that are not focused on, that are not situated in just one place. So example nito, si Walmart, si General Motors, with the most popular, McDonald's. So si McDonald's, nagsimula siya sa Amerika, but it has million or thousands of branches around the world. Thus the concept of the McDonaldization. These TNCs actually hold 70% of world trade. So ibig sabihin, itong mga transnational companies na ito, they transfer goods up to 70% of the trading of the world trade. So imagine niyo na lang yung dami ng naita-transfer na goods at saka yung na-share na culture because of these TNCs. So yung mga tinatawag niyo yung mga Uniqlo, that's a transnational corporation. Yung mga nagtitinda ng damit like Nike, Adidas are transnational corporations that transmit or transfer goods to many countries, thus creating a certain kind of culture. So as a political process, globalization is rendered possible in the face of an unstoppable and irreversible techno-economic juggernaut. Sino yung techno-economic juggernaut? This is globalization in itself, no? So ang konsepto is, yes, politics is still possible even if we're beginning to be more global, but the concept is mahirap, no? Mahirap siyang i-push because from a national standpoint, nagkakaroon na tayo ng different influences from other countries na kailangan nating i-address. So si Kenichi Ome, siya yung nagsabi na globalization would result to a borderless world, would say that the nation state lost its role as a meaningful unit of participation in the global economy. It limits the political options of states, lalo na yung mga developing countries. So mapag-aaralan din natin yan, the North-South divide, kung nakita nyo yung course guide natin. The thing about globalization and its effect on the political process is that when you start opening your doors for business, for the economy, for trading, it would mean that these businesses would entail different political climate. What am I saying? Kung kunwari isa kang investor galing sa Amerika o kaya sa China, or I'll use the better term, the better example, China and the Philippine relations. Because we wanted to get the vaccine from the China, if you are aware, diba, we are basically succumbing certain influences from them, no? So ibig sabihin, meron tayong mga decision that are being influenced by China just because we want them to trade with us. So yun ibig ko sabihin when we say that globalization basically, or nation states becomes actually obsolete in the process of globalization, because as other countries try to influence you in order for us to trade with them, no, we are sacrificing our nationalistic capacity to decide. So imbis na kunwari magde-decide ka para sa Filipino people, now you would decide by thinking of how you would make China happy in order for China to trade with us. So sana nagigets yung point ko na yon. So politics mobilize political power and unleash the powers of globalization, and according to John R. Schultz, globalization refers to gradual process of relative territorialization, that facilitate the growth of supra-territorial relations. So, ano ibig sabihin ng basta tatanggalin sa territory. Sorry, I cannot pronounce it clearly. When we say that, ibig sabihin, nawawala yung boundaries, no, yung tinatawag na geographical space that we have actually, yung geographical freedom. Best example ulit, si China, no? Because we want to have a good relationship with China. We tend to lose its our capacity to hold on with our territory, tas yung pinag-aawayang lupa, yung pinag-aawayang territory ng Pilipinas na kinukuha ng China. We cannot fight, as our president would say, we cannot fight China in a war. But deeper than that, we cannot fight China and get something from them as well. So, syempre, ang point ng it transcends that concept of we cannot just fight the war, no? Ang problema din kasi doon, when we fight the war, we will tend to lose, and we will tend to lose the trading that we can have with China, which is very fruitful for this administration. So you see, yung konsepto ng territory now becomes vague. Parang biglang nawawala ngayon because we need to attend to the concept that influences are important, connections are still important with these countries. Okay. Furthermore, globalization is fueled by a mixture of political and technological factors. So si John Gray said that trade wars will make international cooperation difficult. That's one thing. You know about the US-China war and the Huawei thing. Huawei is a transnational corporation. So what happened? Because US and China are in a war, in an economic war, not necessarily a physical war, an economic war. Huawei in between, no, is being affected of this dispute, no. So ang nangyayari ngayon, imbes na magkaroon ng capacity si Huawei as a TNC, as a transnational corporation, to continue the production of goods and trade these goods, your Huawei phones, throughout the world, nagkakaroon ngayon ng pag-inhibit because mayroong iaaway itong dalawang country. Now, they cannot cooperate, thus Huawei suffers. So kung alam niyo yung latest na balita sa Huawei, tinanggal na rin yung capacity nila to get yung supplier ng mga processor ng phones nila. Kasi guys, you need to be familiar with the economic process, ano. When these companies create products such as Huawei, their phones basically do not get all their parts from China. Not just, hindi porket sila ay isang Chinese company, you would expect that all of the parts of their phone would come from China. Of course, they have to outsource. That's the point of the developing countries coming in. Kaya nga the Philippines is a hub for BPOs, yung mga call centers. Kasi kung isa kang transnational company and then you need call center agents to answer helplines, yung mga tinatawagan yung help hotlines, no? Ang gagawin ng TNC ngayon, mag-outsource siya sa isang developing country such as the Philippines to get this service from Filipinos and then to pay lesser. Instead of getting call center agents from the US, from their base, and pay a lot more. So same with Huawei. Huawei gets their parts, their cell phone parts from different parts of the country. They have suppliers from the US, their patents came from the US, their softwares came from the US. Kaya sila apektado ng US-China war, China economic war, kasi they could not now get a license from the US to continue the production of the software and the processors that they need to create more Huawei phones. So yun ang point na globalization is also a political process. Unless you resolve the US-China economic war, TNCs such as Huawei would suffer, thus the ability to globalize their product, so to speak. So Castells, the rise of international capitalism, the nation state is now a bargaining agency. So as we go towards more capitalistic international economy, ang nababargain, gaya nga nasasabi ko, yung capacity ng mga bansa to decide for themselves. Parang nawawalan ka na ng pagkakakilanlan. You cannot now decide for yourself because you're influenced by other countries in order to get them to trade with you, in order to get profit. Yun si international capitalism. Okay. To continue, so global governance is an internationalized, rights-based Western state conglomerate. So according to Wilkinson, state formation is now beyond the national level. So ngayon, ang mga bansa ngayon does not reside with the national level, or its formation does not reside with the national level. According to John Keane, cosmocracy is a messy and a complex polity. It is basically a hybrid democracy in which there is an interlocking and overlapping sub-state and supra-state institutions and multi-dimension process. So dati, kunwari, we do not need to associate ourselves with the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. Now, these agencies have supra-state institutions that can now influence countries. So hindi silang, itong IMF, your World Bank, are not actually countries, but they have a lot of say to what the countries should do. No? So, yun yung tinatawag mong cosmocracy. You're basically meron ng nag-overlap na konsepto na aside from other countries that would influence your state, you now have these supra-state institutions, IMF and World Bank, that would also influence your state. Ano example? If you are familiar with the loans, no, the Philippines are basically getting loans from everywhere, no, dahil because of the pandemic. Because you get these loans, like for example, the European Union. If you are familiar with the European Union, it is a conglomeration of European countries. Ngayon, ang point, when we entered with an agreement with the European Union to give loans to us, no, may part doon na nakalagay na the Philippines could not promote death penalty. Okay, so that's one. No, because we engage with this supra-state institution, which is the European Union, and we need money from them. We need financial support from them. We cannot now impose policies such as death penalty because that would entail us cutting off our ties with them. So you can research about that as well. No, the IMF and the World Bank does the same thing. Do the same thing. Ano? If we get money from them, there are certain conditions from us getting money, aside from the fact that we will pay them. No? We need to promote certain policies that would ensure that their money that they lend to us would go to certain programs that they want to promote. So that is globalization. Nawalan parang ang point, nangutang ka at merong mga kondisyon yung pangungutang mo, aside from the fact that you would pay. Okay. So, yun yung nagiging changes na nabobrought about nung konsepto ng globalization sa political process. So, according to Held and McGrew, globalization diminishes the sovereignty of the national governance. So, yan, nabanggit na natin yan. Globalization is a cultural process. Does it increase cultural homogeneity or heterogeneity? When we say cultural homogeneity and heterogeneity, meaning nagkakaroon ba ng fusion or diffusion? When we say fusion, nagkakaroon ng sharing of culture o nagkakaroon ng diffusion, ibig sabihin, mas nagkakaroon ng differentiation among cultures. How does the dominant culture of consumerism impact the national environment? So according to Tomlinson, cultural globalization is a densely growing network of interconnections and interdependence that characterize modern life. So, ang konsepto ng cultural globalization ay nagkakaroon na ng mas maraming connection within people who don't actually share the same culture but can actually relate with one another in certain aspects of their modern life. Okay. So, furthermore, culture is no longer tied with localities, and some would say that there is increasing homogeneity, though it caters a more Anglo-American value system. So, Americanization as a form of cultural imperialism. So, ang sinasabi dito, culture is no longer associated with the differentiation of locality. So, ang nangyayari ngayon, hindi mo na ngayon ma-promote or hindi nakikita na ngayon yung difference ng kultura natin with other countries that are being influenced by the Anglo-American value system. Ma'am, paano po tayo naapektuhan ng Americanization? We were affected by the Americanization because we adopted the capitalist system. The capitalist system basically emerged from the United States. So the culture that comes with it was already imbibed in the Philippines. So yung pagbili ng mga Nike, yung pagkain ng McDonald's, yung pagbili ng mga Forever 21 na damit, pagnood ng mga TV shows, actually movies. If you are not watching, just imagine yourself, If you have not watched one US movie in your entire life, no, how different would your life be? Diba? Parang ang point ko, hindi ka kasi namulat dun sa mga konsepto na hindi mo alam dahil nanood ka ng US movie. Kasi 'di ba pag nanood kayo, you would agree with me that there are certain things in a US movie, a United States movie that are not being represented in a Filipino movie. Kaya nga ayaw natin nanonood ng Filipino movie eh, 'di ba? Merong mga taong Pilipinong ayaw nanonood ng Filipino movie because they associate a certain type of taste na with the American type of culture na hindi na natin ngayon ma-embrace yung Filipino culture because we are already Americanized in a sense because we adopted, we buy these movies, no? So we adopted this certain culture. Yun yung sinasabi naman cultural imperialism. Dahil masyadong na-propagate yung mga bagay, goods, no, na galing sa Amerika. Nagkakaroon ngayon sila ng what do you call this? Nagkakaroon sila ngayon ng dominance in terms of the type of culture that everyone now exhibits. One thing for sure, like for example, the South Korean vibe or the South Korean hype could possibly change, no, the concept of the pero not in a global scale kasi sa Pilipinas lang naman malakas yung pagpasok ng kulturang Korean. Pero nevertheless, mas malakas pa rin yung konsepto, yung na-imbibe nating culture from the Americans. So, McDonaldization, as evident in American society, leads to the eclipse of cultural diversity and the dehumanization of social relations. According to Benjamin Barber's, McWorld is a form of cultural imperialism. It is a soulless consumer capitalism that is rapidly transforming the world's diverse population into a blandly uniform market. In a nutshell, what is McDonaldization? McDonaldization basically promotes efficiency. No? Kung napapansin nyo, pag pumasok ka ng McDonald's, meron agad silang system of how to get your order. No? Tapos, di ba, ang bilis. Pagkakuha nila ng order mo, meron nang ikaw magiging, ilalabas na nila yung tray, ilalagay na nila yung pagkain mo. And then there is a line system at the back. There are people at the back doing their job in order to provide the food in your tray. That's McDonaldization. That's efficiency. No? You're basically doing a more efficient way in order to provide the service with smaller time and smaller resources in order to get more profit. Ngayon, ang sinasabi ng McDonaldization theory or concept is that all processes in our lives now are being like that. No? Now, we need to be more efficient as possible. So when you create businesses, like for example, sa karinderya, no? Even karinderya would prefer a McDonaldized kind of way, of a more efficient way, in order to limit the resources and to get more profit. Pag kumakain kayo sa mga lugawan, di ba? Ginagawa sa mangkok nyo, nilalagyan ng parang plastic in order to limit the process of washing your bowls after eating lugaw or whatever. This is a system that is imbibed in our processes, no? Because we adopted the American way of living through their goods and services. So moreover, other scholars such as Roland Robertson argued that there is a pluralization of the world as localities produce a variety of unique cultural responses to global forces. So there is a term such as globalization, which is a complex interaction of the global and local characterized by cultural borrowing. It is a complex mixture of both homogenizing and heterogenizing impulses. So, ang example nito na naalala ko, like for example, the Korean adaptation of The Descendants of the Sun. That's a globalization. You borrow something that you get from a certain culture and then localize it in order to get the taste of the people watching in the Philippines. So, the concept of globalization, you get ideas from a more global sense, from a global experience, and then shift it or shape it in a local way in order to get the taste of the people who would consume the good. Hybridization or creolization is the process of cultural mixing as reflected in music, film, fashion, language, and other form of symbolic expressions. Sa mga damit lang yung kung nakikita nyo yung mga ginagawang mga damit ngayon ng mga fashion designers. 'Di ba? Kaya ang konsepto is to adapt certain influences from other countries and make it Filipino pa rin. Pero ang point is that you are now being influenced not just by one culture but many cultures in the formation of these goods and services. So our culture is not now defined by just one culture, no? It is defined by a multitude of cultures na. So Arjan Apaduray identifies 5 conceptual dimensions or landscapes that are constituted by the global cultural flows. So you have an ethnoscape, technoscape, finanscape, mediascape, and idioscape. So these scapes are basically parang, these are formations in different sense. Like for example, the technoscape is for technology, finanscape is for the money, mediascape is for media, and idioscape is for the ideologies. So these are different shapes, no, or scopes or scapes. Let's use what Apadura used. These are different scapes to show how culture now flows, no? So hindi lang siya nagfo-flow through money, which is the finanscape. Hindi lang siya nagfo-flow through the media, through your social media, Facebook, TV, internet, etc. It also flows through ideologies, pagbabago sa pag-iisip, no? Sa perspektibo of how you see things. And then technoscape through technology, and ethnoscape. So the point is, for Apaduray, that the transformation of culture is evident through these 5 scapes. No? Nagbabago siya sa pamamagitan nitong 5 mga ito. So now let's go to the concept of globalization, globality, and globalism. Though I will discuss this in the next video. Pero please read this, no? And I will specify what are the differences in the next video. So, here are the different ideologies of globalization according to Steger. The first one is the neoliberalism. So basically, this is what I am constantly telling you kanina pa, which is the market liberalism or the concept of the free enterprise. So this view holds the intent that intentional development is not necessary and is actually traced back to the work of Adam Smith. So ano si neoliberalism? Just to make ourselves clear. There are 3 obstacles to development, namely tradition, monopoly, and state regulation. So pag sinabi mong neoliberalism, you are now towards free trade. Sinasabi ko kanina sa inyo na lesser restrictions, lesser tax, para maraming mas matrade na goods and service. Ngayon, anong obstacle mo ngayon para makapasok yung goods at makapaglabas ka ng goods to other countries? The 3 obstacles to development are 1, tradition. Kaya nga kung mapapansin nyo, merong foreign company, gustong magtayo ng mining center or magmina sa isang sa mga lugar natin sa Pilipinas na pinaninirahan ng mga IPs. Because of tradition, there is now an obstacle to development, no? Sasabihin mo, ba't kasi ayaw pa nila pumayag? That's an economic kind of thinking. Sasabihin mo, ayaw nila pumayag, they're hindering the concept of development, they're hindering the concept of globalization. Pero if you are in the side of the IPs, you would say that tradition now holds important because as we are going global, no, tradition of this IP of indigenous people actually are the ones, no, that remains authentic. What do I mean when I say authentic? Ito yung mga kultura na hindi pa naiimpluwensyahan ng ibang bansa. Because this type of people or the IPs, no, do not regularly receive goods that we get. So kung hindi katulad natin na nakakabili kayo ng shampoo na Palmolive or etc., sila, 'di ba? They remain on the traditional side of things. They still use traditional goods in order to make a living. Like for example, gagamit sila ng kahoy para maggawa ng apoy pangluto. We're not like that, no? We do not subscribe to that culture. So, kung merong 2 sides of the coin lagi, if you are in the economic side of things or in a pro-globalization concept, you would say that tradition actually hinders the process of globalization. But if you are in the concept of culture, you would say that tradition should remain because as we go global, this tradition should be intact in order for us to remember who we are. Kasi kapag ang nangyari ay ang kultura natin ay halo-halo na ng iba't ibang kultura ng ibang bansa, how would you now say that you are a Filipino and how distinct are you from another person? No? Sana na naiintindihan niyo ako. So these are the problems that comes with the concept of globalization and its occurrence. So next obstacle to development, monopoly and state regulation. So yung state regulation yun nga, yung policies ng gobyerno will now hinder the capacity to become global. So ang sinasabi ng neoliberalism, kung titingnan niyo ulit yung ideology na yan, sinasabi ng neoliberalism, we need now to take down the state or limit the state's power in order for us to continue with the free trade. Okay, so yun. The next one is structuralism. So it views history as a summary of political and economic struggles between large groups or classes. So the similarities of structuralism with neoliberalism is that first, it views development as in terms of broad or historical social change, and industrialization is favorable to economic growth. However, its contradictions with neoliberalism is that the latter emphasize, or structuralism emphasize, that materialist motivations of individual and self-regulating market, while structuralism gives importance on social solidarity, class, and collective forms of action. So, ang konsepto ng structuralism basically transcends the economic sense. No? So, kaya nga meron siyang similarity pa rin with the neoliberalism, pero hindi siya totally similar to it because aside from the economic, it has political forces that comes with it. So in terms of similarities, yes, neoliberalism and structuralism follows the same thought that there should be historical or social changes and that industrialization is actually favorable. However, the difference, is that because there are political struggles or political forces coming in, the concept of the neoliberalism actually promotes a more materialistic type of motivations in terms of providing goods and services, while structuralism actually gives importance to the concept of solidarity, class, and collective forms of action, actually promoting the government. So yun ang difference. Structuralism basically allows for the free flow of goods, but at the same time holds that the national government, nation states are still viable, are still important in order to promote this transfer. Okay, so yan, may mga pagkakaiba-iba ng ideologies. So two models under structuralism is Marxism, which is the antagonism in capitalism or a particular type of class society. So there are issues on relations to production and means of production, and class exploitation and oppression are essential features of capitalism. So first model ng structuralism is Marxism. Kung familiar kayo dito, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So ang konsepto ng Marxism basically are na merong na-exploit, class exploitation, at merong na-oppress because there are people who would promote capitalism or the promotion of profit. Pero ang point is, as we try to get more profit, certain classes would be exploited because they are the ones who would work for the profit. So ang basic example ito yung mga manggagawa at saka yung may-ari ng kumpanya. So dahil yung may-ari ng kumpanya gusto niyang makakuha ng mas maraming profit, there could possibly be exploitations on the capacities of the manggagawa, of the workers, in order to get more profit for the and in the end, these workers would get less. No, they will not get the actual amount that they have to receive because nga this owner wants to get the profit at most. No, so that's the Marxist concept of Marxist model. While on the other hand, the dependency model is in favor of industrialization but believe that southern countries should not be dependent with the north. Thus, there is a need to withdraw from the international capitalist system. So it argues that the industrialization of the northern capitalist created structures in which southern economies were dependent and which tend to lead to and maintain underdevelopment. So mapag-aaralan din natin yan sa North and South divide. Ang konsepto ng dependency model is that, ganito yung konsepto niya, no? The North basically are wealthy countries. Kadalasan sila yung mga developed countries, the core group. Tapos ang mangyayari ngayon, these countries from the North will now want to get profit. So how they would do that? Gaya ng nakwento ko kanina, they would outsource their resources from the South. Ibig sabihin, kukuha sila ng mga tao mula sa South, nababayaran nila ng mas mura compared kung doon sila kukuha sa North, no? Kukuha sila ng mga tao sa South to do their labor. So mga factory workers, magtatayo sila ng factory sa China, hindi sa China, sa Philippines, sa Thailand, etc. And then they would get less, they would have to pay less, no? Ang system, when the product has already been produced, these North countries that have TNCs, transnational companies, would now sell the good to these underdeveloped countries, to the South. Thus the dependency, because you need now to sustain the need to buy the things from them, you would now need to work for them. Okay. So naiintindihan ako, ang ginagawa ngayon ng mga TNCs na from the North, they would outsource labor from the South. Tapos tayo, kunwari tayo mga call center agents, yung mga factory workers, we would produce their good. And when the good is produced, they would sell the goods to us. But for us to get the good, no, para makuha natin yung binibenta nilang good, we have to work for it. Thus the continuing dependency on the North. Okay? Same with their governments. Dahil syempre yung governments ng countries from the North would need to sustain, no, trading with us. Trading in terms of labor. So kailangan nilang ma-ensure na magbibigay pa rin tayo ng labor sa mga kumpanya sa kanila. So ang gagawin nila, pauutangin nila tayo, no? Bibigyan nila tayo ng loans in order to improve our capacity to produce, no? Para magkaroon tayo ng capacity na magtrabaho pa ng magtrabaho in order to buy the goods again from them. So sa kayo nakakita, pinagtrabahuan mo, binayaran ka ng mababa, pero pag na-produce yung good, you would pay the good as is. So, nagigets, nagkakaroon ngayon ng continuing dependency on them. Okay. Tapos kaya hindi tayo nagiging developed, kaya ayan na nakalagay, underdevelopment. So, still under the dependency theory, the core periphery argument, ayan na ulit. Kung merong North and South divide, meron naman tinatawag na core and periphery. So, ano ibig sabihin ng core periphery? Pag sinabing core periphery, imagine niyo may bilog. Ano? Itong bilog na ito yung core countries. So, such as the US, Japan, and China. So, from the core, merong peripheries, yung susunod na bilog. So, nagsimula ka sa maliit na bilog, tapos may susunod na bilog. Yung susunod na bilog, these are the peripheries. Ano ibig sabihin ng peripheries? Ito yung katabi. Ngayon, the further you go along, or the further you go away from the core, no, ang ina-assert is, habang lumalayo ka sa core, ang ibig sabihin ay mas dependent ka sa kanya, sa core. Okay. So, ang ibig sabihin, so kung makikita nyo dito, based on the observation within many spatial systems, sharp territorial contrast exists in wealth, economic advancement, and growth between the core and the periphery. So core is the US, Japan, Western Europe. Periphery is the Latin and America, Asia, and the Pacific. So kung ang core mo ay yung si US, si Japan, Western Europe, the further you go away from the core, the more that you need the core. Okay? So si core, siya yung pinaka-develop, siya yung pinaka-hindi kailangan ng help from other countries because they can sustain, they can stand on their own. Samantalang yung mga nasa pinakalabas, the outside peripheries, would need to trade with the core countries in order to sustain their economic system. So tayo, sa Philippines, do you think we would prosper without the help of the US and Japan or of the Western Europe countries? No, we need them. We need their investments. We need their products. We need their laborer. We need to be their laborers in order for us to get profits in order for us to financially capacitate our economic system. So kung hindi tayo magde-depend sa kanila, hindi tayo magkakaroon ng capacity para magkaroon ng kikitain. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng core periphery argument of the dependency theory. So yung next, interventionism. So it is argued that to regulate the market, there is a need for state intervention. So different from structuralism and neoliberalism, interventionism claims that there is a need, there would always be the need for state intervention. So hindi mo pwedeng itanggalin si state, nation state. So the pertinent question to answer include how much intervention or what kind of intervention. So ayan yung mga binanggit, si Keynesian view, protectionism, welfareism, global environmentalism. So I would tell you now, ngayon pa lang, that interventionism is the complete opposite of neoliberalism because neoliberalism is free. As much as possible, we limit the capacity of the nation states to influence any economic decision. Pero when we say interventionism, when we say interventionism, you need government, or the nation state. Ibig sabihin, capacity the nation states in order for them to decide. No? So, ang konsepto nito, if you are going for a global kind of transactions, all decisions would come from the government. So ito yung best example ko nga, si North Korea. Si North Korea, di ba, bumibili ng military supplies from other countries. But they regulate the kind of trading that they do with countries that trade with them. So kung meron akong klase before, ang mga weapons na binibili ng North Korea ay nanggagaling sa Middle East countries. So, since these Middle East countries are also in conflict with the United States, same with the North Korea, they go into trade, no? Because the government sees they can regulate, they can intervene, no? With the concept of trading with countries that are in conflict with the US. Pero they would never, ever trade with the US itself or South Korea for that matter. Because these are countries that they are in conflict with. So yun ang point with interventionism. Even though, isipin nyo mabuti, South Korea is the nearest place to North Korea for trading. They would not do that. Diba? They would get a lot of profit from trading with South Korea, but North Korea would never, ever do that. Because their economy is not based on a capitalist system. Hindi sila after profit. Hindi yung profit ang habol nila. Ang habol nila is to sustain the concept, the power of the nation state to decide for themselves. So yung capacity ng North Korea na manatiling sila ang nagde-decide para sa sarili nila and not to get influenced by the culture of South Korea. Kaya nga, kung during the lockdown, you have watched the South Korean TV show, no? Yung Chloe, Crash Landing on You, di ba? Any culture that comes from South Korea is basically new to them, no? Di ba yung mga ipinakikilala ng girl na taga South Korea is very new to the military men from the North Korea because North Korea, as much as possible, would like to maintain their culture as is, would like to be pure as is, would like the government to maintain how their people would think. Sa atin kasi, sa South Korea and the Philippines being capitalist system, di ba tayo more on free, right? Right? Your freedom of expression, your freedom to choose, freedom, etc., etc. So the government cannot impose on you what to watch, what to think, what to buy, what to wear, etc. Pero sa North Korea, pansinin nyo, di ba, there is a restrictions on all of this. This is basically interventionism at its fullest. Lilinawin ko lang din. May mga bansang nagpa-practice sa interventionism pero hindi kasing lala or kasing strict ng North Korea. North Korea is basically the best example of the interventionism, but pero merong mga bansa na nagpa-practice sa interventionism at certain levels, no? Ibig sabihin hindi sila nagpa-practice as much. So this Keynesian view, no, was developed in the Great Depression. It argued that there are periodic booms and slumps as problems of capitalism. Keynes would view that the state should spend to create employment and increase income that would stimulate demand and restore business confidence. So the Keynesian view would claim that the economy, the capitalist economy has booms, no, may pagtaas at saka merong pagbaksak, what we call depression. Ngayon, nasabi ni Keynes, in order to address the depression, the government should create employment and provide income. No? So basically, the government would now need to create firms or allow the creation of firms that would result to the creation of employment and increasing of income of people. Protectionism is developed in the 19th century, which argued that there is a need to protect infant industries or newly industrialized countries, NICs, from competition to well-established industries. So protectionism naman, ang sinasabi niya, yung mga maliliit na bansa, newly industrial countries, should be protected from well-established countries from exploitation. Yung kinukwento ko kanina, that wealthy countries would now use these newly industrialized countries in order to get labor, cheaper labor from these countries. Thus, the concept of exploitation in a sense. So, si protectionism, ang sinasabi niya ngayon, itaas mo ngayon yung tax concessions and incentives in order for these countries not to prey on laborers from newly industrialized countries. And the next one, yung interventionism, so welfareism. So, development planning should be linked to investment and creation of jobs, eradication of poverty, and improvement of services such as health. So, ang konsepto ng welfareism, no, ay the government would provide, no, for everything, no, ibig sabihin health, no, public transport. Do you know that there is a welfare state in the world, no? Merong maraming welfare state. Canada is one. Kaya nga mahirap pumasok sa Canada kasi welfare state sila. But the best welfare state that you would know is Norway. So sa Norway, since it is a welfare state, the government will provide free education, free healthcare, and free public transportation to its people. Kung hindi man free, limited or mababa. Bakit? Bakit mo tinawag na welfareism yun? Ang konsepto ng mga bansa na yun, mas yayaman ka pag yung mga individuals mo, residents mo, would not need to spend on education, health, and transportation. So where would they spend their money? They will spend their money on buying goods and services from businesses in Norway. Nakuha niyo yung logic ng welfareism, no? So the government, ito pang system sa welfareism, the government would provide pensions to old people in order to provide them the capacity to still spend even at an old age. So ano ibig sabihin nun? Kung nasa isa kang welfare country such as Norway, ang gagawin ng gobyerno nila, bibigyan ng pension yung mga matatanda kahit na hindi sila nagtrabaho, kahit hindi sila nag-GSIS para katulad sa atin. They would get pension in order for them to still buy things from Norway in order to sustain their economy. Ma'am, pwede po bang gawin sa Pilipinas yun? Hindi, kasi tayo ay nasa kapitalistang sistema. We're not geared towards getting welfare. We're geared towards getting more profit. Kasi ang problema sa welfare state, dahil nga mataas ang tax nila, super taas ng tax sa Norway kasi they need to sustain what their government has been doing, yung paglilibre sa transportation, sa healthcare, at saka sa education. So, in order to sustain this welfare programs, they need to pay high taxes, meaning lesser income. Kung isa kang business, ang gagawin mo ngayon, mas magbabayad ka ng mataas na tax, which would lower your income, but at the same time, that would ensure that you could still produce goods and sell goods to your people because they have the capacity to buy. Okay. So, i-search nyo yun, what are welfare states. Kaya nga, ang problema sa mga welfare states, mahirap silang pasukin. Kasi, pag pumasok ka sa welfare state, pag pumasok ka sa welfare state, kailangan kang sagutin ng bansa nila. Kaya, ang gagawin nila, i-deny ka nila of entry in order for them not to take care of you. So, syempre, meron na silang mga residents that they have to take care of. So, hindi na nila kailangan ng mga immigrants na kailangan din nilang alagaan. So, yun. So, For the next slide, which is globalism is an ideology as it tends to combine traditional ones, the neoliberalism, interventionism, etc. So itong 6 core claims of globalism, I will discuss to the next video because I made a separate PowerPoint for this, and in order for me to give you a shorter discussion for this reading kasi medyo mahaba yung reading, 20 pages ano. So please wait for my other video, and I hope you understand something from this. You can post questions for this discussion, and please bear in mind that all questions should be about the lesson ano. So kung meron man kayong tanong sa mga in-example ko, you can research them by yourself. So ang i-entertain ko lang questions ay tungkol dun sa mga na-discuss natin dito sa klase. So kung merong mga part na hindi kayo naintindihan, you can ask me about them. Pero yung mga examples that you are basically na-entice kayo, parang na-curious kayo, you can research them naman in Google. Okay, in order for me to save time then, because there are a lot of you in my classes. So, yun lang. If you have questions, post it in the, or you can email me or post it in the Google Classroom. I'll see you for the next video. Bye.